If you want to see power stripped bare, watch what happens when a man who rules through fear walks into a room full of people who think they still matter. Stay until the end, because what's coming will shatter everything you thought you knew about control. Drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from. Storm clouds pressed down on Blackthorn Keep like a fist closing around a throat. Duke Lucien Ravenscar stood on the highest balcony of his fortress, one gloved hand gripping the stone railing hard enough that the leather creaked. Below him, torches burned across the valley in precise rows. Villages, towns, territories that bent because he demanded it and stayed bent because they remembered what happened when they didn't. The wind carried smoke and the smell of snow coming early. Lucien breathed it in and felt nothing. That was the problem with becoming what he'd become. Sensation died first, then sympathy. Then everything except the cold understanding that power wasn't about being loved or even respected. It was about making sure no one ever dared to take from you again. His reflection stared back from the darkened glass of the balcony door. Black coat, black hair pulled back severe, eyes that looked carved from the same stone as the keep itself. 32 years old, and already they called him the Iron Duke behind closed doors. To his face they called him Your Grace, and kept their hands where he could see them. Someone knocked. 3 times. His personal steward wouldn't interrupt unless blood had been spilled or money had gone missing. Come in. The door opened and Marcus entered, gray-haired and steady, carrying a wooden box that looked like it had survived a war. The old man set it on the table near the fireplace with more care than Lucien had seen him use in years. Your Grace. The charitable auction items arrived from the capital. Most of it is the usual refuse. Damaged furniture, old clothing, books with half the pages missing. But this trunk came from Whitmore Manor. Whitmore. Lucien turned from the balcony and studied the box with new interest. Sir Aldrich Whitmore had been one of the few honest men at court before a riding accident killed him 3 years ago. The family had money, status, no reason to be donating trash. What's inside? I haven't opened it, Your Grace. Given the family's standing, I thought you might want to inspect it personally. Lucien crossed to the table and lifted the trunk's lid. The hinges protested but held. Inside lay folded linens that smelled faintly of lavender, a few leather-bound books with gilt edges, and at the very bottom, a stack of letters tied with a fraying ribbon. He pulled the letters free and untied the ribbon. The paper was expensive but worn at the creases like someone had folded and unfolded them many times. The handwriting was precise, controlled, almost architectural in its discipline. He opened the first letter. To whoever finds this, I am writing because silence has become unbearable. Not the quiet kind that soothes, the kind that buries you alive one day at a time until you forget what your own voice sounds like. Lucien's eyes narrowed. He kept reading. They say I am delicate, too fragile for society, too sensitive for the cruelty of gatherings where women smile with knives hidden behind their fans. My stepmother decided this after my father died. She decided it loudly and often until everyone believed her. The truth is simpler and worse. I am convenient to forget. The words hit like a blade between ribs. Clean, precise, devastating. Lucien read 3 more letters without moving from the fireplace, each one carved deeper. This woman, whoever she was, wrote about disappearing inside her own home, about watching life happen through floorboards while servants pretended she didn't exist, about step-family members who smiled at dinners she wasn't invited to anymore. But she didn't beg, didn't plead. She observed, analyzed, turned her isolation into a lens that saw through every lie the aristocracy told itself about kindness and propriety. By the 7th letter, Lucien understood something that made his jaw tighten. Someone had locked this woman away not because she was weak, because she was dangerous. The kind of dangerous that came from seeing too clearly, from refusing to pretend the world was anything other than what it actually was. A machine built to crush anyone who couldn't defend themselves. Marcus. Who donated this trunk? Lady Beatrice Whitmore, Your Grace. Sir Aldrich's widow. She's remarried now. Calls herself Lady Beatrice Ashford. And Sir Aldrich's daughter? The steward hesitated. I believe she still resides at Whitmore Manor, Your Grace, though I cannot recall seeing her in public since her father's funeral. Lucien set the letters down carefully. His mind was already moving through possibilities like a general planning an assault, a forgotten daughter, a stepmother too eager to erase her, letters that read like someone documenting her own burial. He'd spent 10 years learning to recognize when people were being destroyed quietly. It was his specialty. The difference was he usually did the destroying. This time, he wanted to know who thought they could get away with it. Arrange a visit to Whitmore Manor. Tell Lady Beatrice I am personally overseeing the Northern charity distributions this season and require a meeting to discuss their contributions. Marcus nodded. When would you like to call upon them? Your Grace? Tomorrow. The old steward's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't question it. He'd served Lucien long enough to know when his master had locked on to something. Yes, Your Grace. After Marcus left, Lucien read the letters again. All of them. By the time he finished, dawn was bleeding gray light across the mountains, and he'd memorized every word. He'd also made a decision. If this woman was being erased, he was going to drag her back into the light whether she wanted it or not. Not because he was noble. Lucien had stopped pretending to nobility the day his brother's body came back from the rebellion wrapped in a blood-soaked banner. He did it because everyone who participated in making someone disappear deserved to understand what happened when the Duke of Ravenscar decided they'd gone too far. And because something about her words had cut through the ice he'd built around himself and made him feel something other than cold calculation for the first time in years. Whitmore Manor sat in the kind of neighborhood where old money pretended new money didn't exist. The gardens were maintained with military precision. The stonework had been cleaned so many times it looked like it might crumble from exhaustion. Lucien's carriage rolled up the circular drive just after noon. He stepped out into autumn sunlight that felt too clean for what he was about to do. 2 footmen in the Ravenscar colors flanked him as he approached the entrance. The doors opened before he could knock. A butler who looked like he'd been carved from wax bowed so low, Lucien wondered if his spine would survive it. Your Grace, Lady Beatrice is expecting you in the drawing room. Lead the way. They walked through halls lined with portraits of Whitmore ancestors, who all seemed to be judging the present from their gilded frames. Lucien studied each one. None of them looked like they'd tolerate weakness, which made what was happening to Sir Aldrich's daughter even more pointed. The drawing room was everything Lucien expected. Too much gold, too many flowers, too much effort trying to prove wealth that was already obvious. Lady Beatrice rose from a chair near the window. She was beautiful in the calculated way that required money and effort. Blonde hair, perfect posture, a smile that had been practiced until it looked almost genuine. Your Grace, what an unexpected honor. Please sit. Lucien remained standing. He'd learned early that height was a weapon and he never gave it away without reason. Lady Beatrice, thank you for receiving me on such short notice. Of course, anything for the Duke of Ravenscar. Her eyes moved over him with the kind of assessment women at court had perfected, looking for weaknesses, calculating angles. She gestured to a nearby chair again. May I offer you tea? This won't take long. I'm here about your charitable donation. The trunk from Whitmore Manor. Something flickered across her face. Too fast to name, but Lucien caught it anyway. Oh yes, just some old items we no longer needed. I hope they prove useful. They did. Particularly the letters. Lady Beatrice's smile tightened at the corners. Letters? Personal correspondence, written by someone in this household. Someone who appears to have been forgotten. The silence that followed was the kind that happened when people realized they'd miscalculated badly. I'm not certain what you're referring to, Your Grace. Perhaps a servant included something by mistake. Lucien pulled one of the letters from his coat. The paper crackled in the quiet drawing room. He didn't read from it, just held it where she could see the handwriting. This was written by someone educated, someone with access to expensive paper and enough time to think very carefully about what she was saying. I doubt a servant fits that description. Lady Beatrice's face went carefully blank. If you're referring to my stepdaughter, I'm afraid Seraphina is quite unwell. She's been confined to her rooms for some time. The physicians recommend isolation and quiet. Lucien smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. How convenient. I beg your pardon? That your stepdaughter became unwell at exactly the moment you remarried. That she requires isolation in a house full of servants and family. That no one in society has seen her in 3 years, despite her father being one of the most prominent men in the capital before his death. Lady Beatrice drew herself up. Her voice went cold. I don't appreciate your insinuation, Your Grace. Seraphina's condition is a private family matter. We've done everything possible to ensure her comfort. I'm sure you have, which is why I'd like to meet her. The color drained from Lady Beatrice's face. That's not possible. Why? Because she's not receiving visitors. Not receiving or not allowed. The drawing room door opened before Lady Beatrice could answer. A young woman entered wearing a dress that cost more than most people earned in a year. Blonde hair like her mother. Blue eyes that sized Lucian up immediately with the kind of hunger that made his skin crawl. "Mother, you didn't tell me the Duke of Ravenscar was calling." She moved toward him with practiced grace. "Your Grace, I'm Eveline Ashford, Lady Beatrice's daughter." Lucian barely glanced at her. "I was just asking your mother about Miss Seraphina Whitmore. Perhaps you could tell me where I might find her." Eveline's smile faltered. "Oh, Seraphina. She's very ill, Your Grace. Hardly fit for company." "So I've been told. Strange that no one can seem to agree on the nature of her illness." Lady Beatrice stepped forward. "Your Grace, I really must insist." A door at the far end of the hall creaked open. All three of them turned. A young woman stood in the doorway. She wore a pale green dress that looked years out of fashion. Her dark hair was pinned back simply. No jewelry, no ornamentation. But her eyes were sharp and steady, and when they met Lucian's across the distance, something in his chest locked tight. "Seraphina." Lady Beatrice's voice could have frozen wine. "Return to your room immediately." The young woman didn't move. She looked at Lucian like she was trying to solve an equation. "I heard voices. I thought perhaps someone had come to discuss Father's library donations. He always said the Duke of Ravenscar appreciated rare books." Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Controlled. The same precision he'd seen in her letters. Lucian walked toward her. Both Lady Beatrice and Eveline made sounds of protest, but he ignored them completely. He stopped 3 feet from Seraphina and studied her the way he studied opponents across a negotiating table. She didn't look fragile. She looked like someone who'd learned to survive on scraps of dignity while everyone around her pretended she didn't exist. "Miss Whitmore, I read your letters." Seraphina's eyes widened. Then her face went carefully neutral. "I see. They were included in a charitable donation. Accidentally, I assume." "Yes." She glanced past him toward her stepmother. "An accident." Lucian stepped slightly to the left, blocking her view of Lady Beatrice. "Do you still write them?" "Every night. Why?" "Because silence without witness becomes madness. Writing proves I still exist even if no one else seems to notice." The words hit exactly the way her letters had. Clean and devastating. Lucian made a decision that would detonate through aristocratic society like a powder keg thrown into a fire. "Miss Whitmore, would you join me for tea? There's a sitting room near the entrance that looks suitable. We can discuss your father's library." "Your Grace." Lady Beatrice was beside them now, voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Seraphina is not well enough for socializing." Lucian didn't look away from Seraphina. "She looks perfectly capable of sitting and talking. Unless you're suggesting she's too dangerous to be around other people." Seraphina's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I promise not to attack you with the teacups, Your Grace. Then we have an understanding." He offered his arm. Seraphina stared at it for several long seconds like it might be a trap. Then she placed her hand on his sleeve with the kind of careful dignity that suggested she knew exactly how momentous this was. They walked past Lady Beatrice and Eveline toward the sitting room. Behind them, he could hear frantic whispers starting. Servants would talk. Word would spread. By evening, every drawing room in the capital would be buzzing with the news that the Duke of Ravenscar had publicly acknowledged the forgotten Whitmore daughter. Good. Let them talk. Let them wonder. And let everyone who'd participated in locking this woman away start counting the hours until he decided what to do about it. The sitting room had clearly been Sir Aldrich's space once. Books lined the walls. The furniture was comfortable rather than fashionable. A fireplace that had actually been used rather than just decorated. Seraphina walked to the window and stood with her back to Lucian. She was trembling, trying to hide it, but failing. "You're angry." She turned. Her face was composed, but her hands were fists. "You shouldn't have come here." "Why not?" "Because you've made everything worse. They'll lock the door now. Take away the paper. Make sure nothing else escapes." Lucian moved closer. "Then I'll come back. And they'll turn you away. They can try." Seraphina laughed. It was a broken sound. "You don't understand. You're the Duke of Ravenscar. You command. You conquer. You have power. I have nothing. I am nothing. A forgotten daughter in a forgotten room writing letters to no one because it's the only proof I existed at all." Lucian stopped 2 feet from her. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and absolutely certain. "You're not nothing. You're the most dangerous woman I've met in years." Her eyes snapped to his. "What?" "You see through everything. The lies. The performance. The pretty words aristocrats use to pretend they're civilized while they destroy each other. That's why they locked you away. Not because you're weak, because you're a threat." Seraphina stared at him. For the first time since he'd arrived, she looked uncertain. "I don't want to be a threat. I just want to exist. That's not how the world works. Existing is threatening when you refuse to disappear quietly." They stood in the afternoon light while dust turned gold in the air around them. Lucien had walked into this house planning to expose cruelty, to punish people who thought they could erase someone without consequence. But looking at Seraphina now, he realized this wasn't about punishment anymore. This was about recognition, about one buried person recognizing another. Because Lucien had spent 10 years building walls around himself, becoming exactly as cold and ruthless as everyone feared, surviving by making sure no one could ever hurt him the way losing his brother had hurt him. And here stood a woman who'd been buried alive and somehow kept writing, kept thinking, kept refusing to let them turn her into the ghost they wanted. The door burst open. Lady Beatrice entered with 2 servants behind her. Her face was pale with fury. "Your Grace, I really must insist that Seraphina return to her rooms. The excitement has been too much for her delicate constitution." Lucien didn't turn around. "Has a physician diagnosed this delicate constitution?" "Several physicians have confirmed." "Names," Lady Beatrice faltered. "I beg your pardon? Give me the names of these physicians who've declared Miss Whitmore unfit for society." The silence stretched. Lucien finally turned and looked at Lady Beatrice with the expression that made generals sweat during council meetings. "I thought not." "Your Grace, this is highly inappropriate. What's inappropriate is keeping a woman prisoner in her own home under the guise of medical necessity. What's inappropriate is erasing someone because they're inconvenient. What's inappropriate is thinking I wouldn't notice." Lady Beatrice drew herself up. "You have no authority here." Lucien smiled. It was the smile that usually preceded someone losing everything they owned. "You're right. I have no authority inside your home, but I have considerable authority everywhere else, including in the circles where you desperately want your daughter Evelyn to be accepted, where contracts get signed, where marriages get arranged, where reputations get built or demolished based on a single well-placed word." The color drained from Lady Beatrice's face. Lucien continued, voice soft and absolutely lethal. "So here's what's going to happen. Starting tomorrow, I will be calling on Miss Whitmore regularly. We'll take tea, discuss literature, perhaps walk in the gardens if the weather permits. You will not interfere, you will not make excuses, and you will certainly not attempt to hide her away again. You can't dictate." "I can. I am. And if you have any doubt about whether I'll follow through, ask Lord Pemberton what happened when he tried to undercut my trade agreements last year. Or Lady Ashworth what happened when she spread rumors about my family. I believe she's living in the countryside now. Very quiet. Very isolated. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun." Lady Beatrice looked at Seraphina with naked fury, then back at Lucien. "You're making a terrible mistake, Your Grace. I've made many terrible mistakes. This isn't one of them." He turned to Seraphina. "Tomorrow at 2. We have a great deal to discuss about your father's library." Seraphina nodded slowly. "Tomorrow at 2. Lucien walked past Lady Beatrice without another word. His footman fell in behind him as he strode through the house and back to his carriage. As they rolled away from Whitmore Manor, Marcus cleared his throat from the facing seat. "Your Grace, if I may ask, what exactly are you planning?" Lucien looked out the window at the city passing by. Carriages, pedestrians, people moving through their lives completely unaware that everything was about to change. "I'm planning to declare war, Marcus. The quiet kind. The kind fought in drawing rooms and parliament halls. The kind where reputations die and alliances shatter. Against Lady Beatrice, Château. Against everyone who thought they could bury someone alive and call it kindness." The old steward was quiet for a moment. "And Miss Whitmore," Lucien pulled one of her letters from his pocket and read the last line again. "I am writing this so that someday someone might know I was here, that I mattered, that I refused to disappear even when disappearing would have been easier." He folded the letter carefully. "Miss Whitmore is about to learn what happens when someone actually listens." The carriage rolled through the gates of Blackthorn Keep as the sun set behind the mountains. Storm clouds were gathering again, the kind that promised lightning and violence and the destruction of everything fragile. Lucien watched them come and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not peace, anticipation, because war was coming. The aristocracy just didn't know it yet. They would wake up tomorrow expecting business as usual, dinners and dances and the careful management of their perfect little world. Instead, they were going to discover that the Iron Duke had found something worth protecting. And when Lucien Ravenscar decided to protect something, he didn't ask permission. He took. And he destroyed anyone who tried to stop him. The next morning arrived cold and sharp. Lucien stood in his study watching frost creep across the windows while Marcus laid out correspondence that required attention. Trade agreements, border disputes, a formal complaint from Lord Pemberton about iron ore contracts that had mysteriously dried up overnight. Lucien signed everything without reading it. His mind was already at Whitmore Manor. Your Grace, Marcus set down another stack of papers. The council is expecting you at 4 to discuss the northern tariffs. Cancel it. The old steward's pen paused mid-stroke. Your Grace, I said cancel it. Send my regrets. Urgent personal matter. Marcus studied him with the kind of careful attention that came from decades of service. This wouldn't have anything to do with Miss Whitmore, would it? Lucien didn't answer. He was reading through Seraphina's letters again. The 8th one described watching her stepmother host a dinner party while she remained locked upstairs. She'd counted voices, identified guests by their laughter, mapped the entire social hierarchy of the capital from sound alone. It was the loneliest thing he'd ever read, and it made him want to burn Whitmore Manor to the ground with everyone inside except her. Your Grace. Marcus's voice went quiet. Be careful. Whatever you're planning, the court will notice. They always notice when you take an interest in something. Let them notice. Lady Beatrice has connections. Her new husband sits on the King's Council. I'm aware. And Miss Whitmore has been out of society for 3 years. The rumors alone could destroy any chance of... Lucien looked up. His expression stopped Marcus mid-sentence. I don't care about rumors. I care about the fact that they locked a woman in an attic and convinced everyone it was for her own good. I care about the fact that she wrote letters begging to be seen and they threw them away like trash. Marcus set his pen down carefully. What are you going to do? What I should have done the moment I read her words. Make it impossible for them to hide her anymore. He left before Marcus could respond. The carriage was already waiting. His footman knew better than to ask questions when he had that expression on his face. The one that meant someone was about to learn what happened when they underestimated the Duke of Ravenscar. Whitmore Manor looked different in daylight, less imposing, more desperate. The kind of place that spent too much energy maintaining appearances and not enough on substance. The same butler answered the door. His face was carefully neutral, but Lucien caught the tension around his eyes. Word had spread. The servants knew something was happening. Your Grace, Lady Beatrice is in the... I'm here for Miss Whitmore. The sitting room we used yesterday will be sufficient. The butler hesitated. Lady Beatrice requested that all visitors tell Lady Beatrice that I'm not a visitor. I'm a recurring appointment, every day at 2 until further notice. He walked past the butler before the man could formulate a protest. His footmen took up positions in the entrance hall, silent, watchful, making it very clear that the Duke of Ravenscar was not asking permission for anything. Lucien found the sitting room exactly as they'd left it. Books still lined the walls. Dust still caught the afternoon light. He stood by the window and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. He was about to go find her himself when the door opened. Seraphina entered wearing the same pale green dress from yesterday. Her hair was pinned back identically. No jewelry, no ornamentation, but her eyes were sharper, more focused, like she'd spent the night deciding something important. Your Grace. She closed the door behind her. You came back. I said I would. People say a lot of things. Lucien studied her. She was standing differently than yesterday, straighter, like she'd remembered how to take up space. Do you want me to leave? No. She moved to the chair across from him and sat with careful dignity. I want to understand why you're doing this. Because your letters were the most honest thing I've read in 10 years. Seraphina's hands tightened in her lap. They were my prison, my proof that I wasn't disappearing. And now they're the reason you're here destroying everything my stepmother built. Good. The word hung between them. Seraphina leaned forward slightly. You don't understand what you've done. She's furious. She spent all night deciding how to manage this, how to explain your visits without admitting I exist. She's terrified you'll expose how they've treated me. She should be terrified. I intend to expose exactly that. Why? What does it matter to you? I'm nobody. A forgotten daughter in a forgotten house. You're the Duke of Ravenscar. You could have anyone, do anything. Why waste your time on someone who doesn't matter? Lucian crossed to where she sat and crouched so they were eye level. His voice went quiet and absolutely certain. You matter because they tried to make you disappear. You matter because you refused to let them. You matter because you kept writing even when no one was listening. That's not weakness. That's survival. Seraphina's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. You're making this worse. When you leave, they'll punish me for it. Then I won't leave. You have to leave eventually. Do I? The question settled between them like a challenge. Seraphina wiped her eyes roughly. What exactly are you proposing, Your Grace? That you stay here indefinitely? That you somehow force my stepmother to treat me like a human being? She controls everything in this house. The servants, the money, the narrative about who I am and why I'm locked away. Then we change the narrative. How? By making you visible, by dragging you into society whether Lady Beatrice likes it or not, by ensuring that everyone in the capital knows you exist and that you're under my protection. Seraphina stood abruptly. You can't protect me from this, from them, from the reality that I have no power and they have everything. Lucian rose to face her. You're wrong. You have the one thing they fear most. What? The truth. The door opened without warning. Lady Beatrice entered, flanked by Eveline and a man Lucian didn't recognize. Older, well-dressed. The kind of self-importance that came from minor political position inflated by proximity to actual power. Your Grace, Lady Beatrice's voice could have cut glass. I don't believe you've met my husband, Lord Reginald Ashford. He serves on His Majesty's council and was quite concerned to hear about your unexpected visits to our home. Lord Ashford stepped forward. His smile was practiced. Your Grace, while we appreciate your interest in our family's charitable work, I'm afraid these daily visits are causing some distress. Seraphina's condition requires consistency and quiet. Your presence, however well-intentioned, disrupts her routine. Lucian didn't move. What condition exactly? Lord Ashford exchanged a glance with Lady Beatrice. She suffers from nervous weakness, melancholia. The physicians have recommended isolation from stimulating company. Show me their reports. The silence was immediate. Lucian continued, voice soft and dangerous. You claim multiple physicians have diagnosed Miss Whitmore with conditions requiring isolation. I'd like to see their written assessments, their names, their credentials, their specific recommendations. Lord Ashford's face went carefully neutral. Those are private medical documents. Then make them public. I'm happy to wait while you retrieve them. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. So is imprisoning a woman in her own home under false medical pretenses. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Eveline stepped forward quickly. Your Grace, perhaps we could discuss this more privately. Mother is only trying to protect Seraphina. She's always been fragile. Even Father said so before he died. Seraphina's voice cut through the room like a blade. Father never said that. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood straighter. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Father said I had the sharpest mind he'd ever encountered. He said I understood people better than anyone at court. He said I was wasted on drawing rooms and idle gossip. Seraphina, stop. Lady Beatrice's face had gone white, but Seraphina continued, years of silence breaking apart into words. He said I should have been born a son because I could have run the estate better than half the men in Parliament. He said I was dangerous because I refused to pretend the world was kind when it was cruel. You're hysterical. Lady Beatrice moved toward her. Lucian stepped between them. Don't. The single word stopped Lady Beatrice cold. Lucian looked at Lord Ashford, at Eveline, at Lady Beatrice, who was trembling with rage, then back to Seraphina, who was breathing hard but standing firm. Here's what's going to happen. Miss Whitmore will be joining me for dinner tomorrow evening at Blackthorn Keep, publicly, with witnesses. She'll need appropriate clothing and a lady's maid to assist her. I'll send my carriage at 7. Absolutely not. Lady Beatrice's voice shook. I forbid it. You have no authority to forbid anything. Miss Whitmore is of age. Her father's will left her independent means, which I'm certain you've been managing quite carefully in her absence. I'm also certain a full accounting would reveal some interesting discrepancies. Lord Ashford went pale. Your Grace, I must protest. Protest to the king if you'd like. I'm happy to explain to His Majesty why I've taken an interest in ensuring that Sir Aldrich Whitmore's daughter receives the respect her position and inheritance deserve. The threat was clear. Lord Ashford's position on the council meant nothing compared to Lucien's influence. Everyone in the room knew it. Lucien turned to Seraphina. Tomorrow at 7. Wear something that makes you feel powerful. She stared at him, then nodded slowly. He walked out without another word. Behind him, he could hear Lady Beatrice starting to rage. Servants would scatter. Plans would be made. Countermeasures would be attempted. Let them try. Lucien was 3 moves ahead and already planning the 4th. As his carriage rolled away from Whitmore Manor, Marcus cleared his throat. Your Grace, you're inviting her to dinner at Blackthorn Keep. That's not just a social call. That's a declaration. I know. The court will interpret it as serious interest. Potential courtship. I know. You've never shown public interest in anyone before. This will cause speculation. Good. Let them speculate. Marcus was quiet for a moment. She's not like the women you usually encounter. She's been isolated for years. Wounded. Vulnerable. Lucien looked at his steward. She's stronger than anyone gives her credit for, including herself. And I'm going to make sure everyone else sees it too, even if it destroys her in the process. The question hit harder than Lucien expected. He thought about Seraphina's letters, about the careful way she documented her own disappearance, about the fact that she'd survived 3 years of isolation without breaking. I'm not going to destroy her. I'm going to give her what she's been denied. Recognition, respect, the opportunity to exist on her own terms instead of theirs. And if she doesn't want that, if the attention terrifies her, then she'll tell me, and I'll listen. But Lucien knew the truth even as he said it. He wasn't giving Seraphina a choice. He was forcing her into the light whether she was ready or not, because he decided she deserved better than the prison they'd built around her. It was the same kind of ruthless certainty he used to crush business rivals and political opponents. The only difference was, this time he told himself it was for her benefit. That night, Lucien sat in his study reading through Seraphina's letters for the 10th time. Each one revealed more layers, more observation, more proof that she saw through the performance of aristocratic life with surgical precision. The 19th letter described watching her stepmother manipulate a marriage negotiation through a closed door. Seraphina had mapped every tactical move, every calculated pause, every weapon disguised as kindness. She would have been magnificent at court if they'd given her the chance. Instead, they'd locked her away because she threatened their carefully constructed lies. Marcus entered carrying a sealed message. This just arrived from Whitmore Manor, delivered by private courier. Lucien broke the seal and read, Your Grace, I understand what you're trying to do. I understand that you believe you're helping, but you're not. You're making me visible to people who prefer I don't exist. You're forcing me into a world I'm not equipped to survive. You're using your power to override my stepmother's cruelty with your own version of control. I didn't ask to be rescued. I asked to be seen. There's a difference. If you truly want to help me, give me the choice you're currently denying. Let me decide whether I'm ready for dinner at Blackthorn Keep. Let me decide whether I want to be dragged into society under your protection, or admit that this isn't about helping me at all. It's about proving you can. S. Lucien read the letter 3 times. Then he did something he almost never did. He questioned whether he was right. The aristocracy called him ruthless because he made decisions without hesitation, without second-guessing. He identified what he wanted and took it. That certainty had built his power, his reputation, his ability to survive in a world that destroyed weak men. But Seraphina wasn't a business deal or a political opponent. She was a woman who'd been controlled by other people her entire life, and he was doing exactly what they'd done, making decisions for her, overriding her agency, justifying it as protection when really it was just another form of possession. He picked up his pen and wrote a response. Miss Whitmore, you're right. I've been so focused on dragging you into the light that I didn't ask if you wanted to be there. I told myself I was helping, that I was giving you what you deserved. But what you deserved was the choice. Dinner tomorrow is an invitation, not a command. If you want to come, my carriage will be there at 7. If you don't, I'll respect that decision. But understand this. I'm not going to stop paying attention. I'm not going to forget you exist. And I'm not going to let your stepmother continue destroying you in private. You asked to be seen. I see you. The question is what you want to do about it. L. He sealed the letter and handed it to Marcus. Have this delivered tonight, private courier. Directly into Miss Whitmore's hands. After Marcus left, Lucien stood at the window looking out at Blackthorn Keep's grounds. Storm clouds were building again, the kind that promised destruction. He'd built his entire life on certainty, on power, on making sure he was never vulnerable the way he'd been when his brother died, and the world proved it didn't care about fairness or justice. But Seraphina's letter had cracked something open, the uncomfortable realization that maybe he'd become exactly what he hated, someone who used power to control people weaker than himself, who justified cruelty as protection, who told himself the ends mattered more than the means. His brother would have called him out on it. Adrian had always been better at seeing through Lucien's rationalizations, better at pointing out when strategic thinking crossed into simple dominance. But Adrian was dead, killed by men who thought power gave them the right to destroy whoever stood in their way. And Lucien had spent 10 years becoming exactly like them because it was the only way to survive. The next evening arrived with the kind of tension that preceded violence. Lucien dressed for dinner in formal black and silver. His steward had prepared Blackthorn Keep's private dining room. Candles, wine, food that would go cold if she didn't come. 7 o'clock came and went. Lucien sat alone at the table watching the clock tick forward. 7:15, 7:30, 7:45. She wasn't coming. He'd pushed too hard, demanded too much, turned her into a piece on a board instead of a person making her own choices. At 8 o'clock, he stood to leave. The door opened. Seraphina entered wearing a midnight blue dress that looked like it had been pulled from storage and altered hastily. Her hair was pinned up elaborately. Someone had loaned her jewelry. She looked terrified and determined in equal measure. You came. She stood in the doorway like she might run. I decided I wanted to be seen. On my own terms. Not because you commanded it. Not because my stepmother forbade it. Because I chose it. Lucien crossed to her slowly. I'm glad. Are you? Or are you glad you won? The question landed like a punch. Seraphina continued, voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Because I need to know what this is. Are you helping me or claiming me? Are you giving me freedom or just replacing one cage with another? Lucien stopped 3 feet away. What do you want it to be? I want to decide for myself. I want to exist without someone else controlling the narrative. I want to matter because I matter, not because the Duke of Ravenscar decided I'm worth his attention. Then that's what you'll have. Just like that? Just like that. Seraphina studied him with those sharp eyes that saw through everything. I don't believe you. Why not? Because powerful men don't give up control. They trade one kind for another. And you're the most powerful man I've ever met. The truth of it sat between them. Lucien had told himself he was helping her, protecting her, giving her what she deserved. But Seraphina was right. He wanted control. He wanted to be the one who saved her, who showed everyone that the forgotten Whitmore daughter mattered because he decided she did. It was possession dressed as protection, and she saw it clearly. You're right. His voice went quiet. I do want control. I want to destroy everyone who hurt you. I want to drag you into society and dare anyone to question your worth. I want to prove that they were wrong to lock you away. But that's about me, not you. And I'm trying to do better. Why? Because your letters reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That survival isn't the same as living. That power without purpose is just elaborate cruelty. That becoming invulnerable meant becoming exactly what I hated. Seraphina moved closer. Her hands were still shaking, but she held his gaze. I don't need you to save me. I need you to stand beside me while I save myself. Lucien felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen for 10 years starting to crack. Then that's what I'll do. Even if it means letting me fail? Even then. Even if it means I choose to go back to Whitmore Manor and endure them on my own terms instead of yours? The question cut deeper than she probably realized. Lucien had spent a decade ensuring he never lost anything important again. Never cared about anything enough to be destroyed by its absence. But standing here looking at Seraphina, he realized he'd already lost that battle. She mattered, and that terrified him more than any political opponent or business rival ever had. Yes, even then. Seraphina searched his face for the lie. When she didn't find it, something in her expression softened. Then I'll stay for dinner, and we'll see what happens after that. They sat across from each other while servants brought food neither of them touched. The conversation started carefully. Books they'd both read, her father's library, the gap between aristocratic performance and reality. But as the evening progressed, the careful distance dissolved. Seraphina talked about the letters, about documenting her own disappearance because it was the only way to prove she existed, about watching society from above and seeing all the ways people destroyed each other with politeness and propriety. Lucien talked about his brother, about the rebellion that killed Adrian because men with power thought rules didn't apply to them, about becoming exactly as ruthless as everyone feared because it was easier than staying vulnerable. By midnight, they'd moved to the library. Seraphina stood by the fireplace holding a book she wasn't reading while Lucien watched her from across the room. I should go back. My stepmother will use every minute I'm gone as proof that I'm unfit for society. Let her try. She will. And she'll find people who believe her, who want to believe that women like me are dangerous, that we need to be controlled for our own good. Then we'll prove them wrong. How? By showing them exactly what you are. Brilliant, observant, stronger than anyone who's tried to break you. Seraphina turned to face him. And what happens when you get bored? When the novelty of rescuing the forgotten daughter wears off, and you remember you're the Duke of Ravenscar with an entire territory to govern? I won't get bored. You don't know that. Yes, I do. How? Because I've spent 10 years being bored by everything and everyone at court. I've sat through 1,000 dinners with women who said exactly what they thought I wanted to hear, who performed interest and intelligence and charm because that's what they were taught to do. And you think I'm different? I know you are. You wrote letters to no one because you needed to be honest more than you needed to be liked. That's not performance. That's survival. Seraphina set the book down. Her voice went quiet. What do you want from me? The question hung in the space between them. Lucien could have lied, could have said something safe and political, could have retreated behind the careful distance that had protected him for years. Instead, he told the truth. I want you to exist, loudly, visibly, in a way that makes everyone who tried to erase you understand they failed. I want to watch you dismantle the aristocracy's polite cruelty with the same precision you used in your letters. I want to stand beside you while you prove that survival is its own kind of power. And I want you to let me destroy anyone who tries to hurt you again. Seraphina crossed to where he stood. She stopped close enough that he could see her pulse jumping in her throat. That's not protection, that's possession. I know. She reached up and touched his face with fingers that trembled. You're exactly as dangerous as they say, more. And you think I should trust you anyway? No. I think you should decide for yourself whether I'm worth the risk. They stood in the firelight while the clock struck 1. Outside, storm clouds finally broke and rain hammered against the windows. Seraphina made her decision. She kissed him. Not tentatively, not carefully. Like someone who'd been buried alive finally breaking through to air. Lucien's control, the iron discipline that had governed every interaction for 10 years, shattered completely. He pulled her closer with a desperation that should have terrified him. This was vulnerability. This was caring about something more than strategy and survival. This was exactly what he'd sworn never to feel again. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Seraphina looked at him with absolute clarity. If I do this, if I let you stand beside me while I fight back, you have to promise me something. Anything. Don't make me choose between existing on my own terms and existing under your protection. Because I'll choose myself every time. Lucien understood what she was really saying. That she'd survived 3 years of isolation by refusing to disappear. That she'd rather go back to that attic than trade one prison for another. That she was exactly as ruthless as he was when it came to survival. I promise. Seraphina studied him, then nodded once. Good. Because tomorrow morning my stepmother is going to declare war. She's going to tell everyone I'm unstable, manipulative, that I've seduced you for your power and position. Let her. And you're going to have to decide whether protecting me is worth the political cost. It is. You don't know what she's capable of. Lucien smiled. It wasn't kind. Neither do you. Yet, Seraphina's expression shifted, something fierce and sharp replacing the fear. Show me. What? Show me what the Duke of Ravenscar does when someone threatens what he's decided to protect. The challenge hung between them. Lucien pulled her close again. His voice went soft and absolutely lethal. You're about to find out. Because tomorrow morning he was going to do something he'd never done before. He was going to make Seraphina Whitmore visible in a way that would detonate through aristocratic society like a bomb. And when Lady Beatrice tried to fight back, when the vultures at court circled looking for weakness, when everyone who'd participated in erasing her tried to do it again, they were going to learn what happened when the Iron Duke decided someone mattered more than politics, more than reputation, more than the carefully constructed distance that had kept him safe for a decade. They were going to learn that Duke of Ravenscar had finally found something worth burning the world down to protect. And there was no going back from that. Morning came like a blade through silk. Lucien woke alone in his study, still dressed from the night before, Seraphina's scent lingering on his coat where she'd pressed against him. The clock showed 6:30. Outside, frost-covered Blackthorn Keep's grounds in white that looked clean until you remembered what ice really was. Just water that had stopped moving, frozen in place by cold that didn't care about beauty or pain. He'd sent her home at 3 with Marcus and 4 guards. She'd protested, said going back to Whitmore Manor felt like walking into a trap. Lucien had kissed her and promised that by sunset today, Lady Beatrice would understand exactly what happened when she tried to cage something that belonged to him. Belonged. The word sat wrong even as he thought it. Seraphina didn't belong to anyone. That was the entire point. But possession was a language Lucien spoke fluently, and unlearning it in a single night wasn't possible. He'd spent 10 years building walls. One kiss didn't demolish them. It just showed him the cracks. Marcus entered without knocking. "Your Grace, we have a problem." Lucien was already on his feet. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that starts wars." The old steward handed him a sealed document. Royal seal. The paper was expensive, the kind used for official declarations that couldn't be ignored. Lucien broke the seal and read, "By order of His Majesty's Council." An inquiry has been opened into allegations of improper conduct between Duke Lucien Ravenscar and Miss Seraphina Whitmore. Testimony has been provided by multiple witnesses suggesting coercion, manipulation, and undue influence over a woman deemed mentally unfit for independent decision-making. Duke Ravenscar is hereby summoned to appear before the King's Council at noon today to address these charges. Failure to appear will result in immediate suspension of titles and seizure of assets pending investigation. Lord Chancellor Edmund Blackwood. Lucien read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. Someone had moved faster than he'd anticipated, turned his protection of Seraphina into a weapon against him, made it look like he was the predator instead of the shield. Who filed the complaint? Marcus's face was grim. Lord Reginald Ashford, Lady Beatrice's husband. He presented testimony from 3 physicians claiming Miss Whitmore suffers from severe delusions and is susceptible to manipulation by authority figures. Lucien crushed the document in his fist. The physicians who've never actually examined her, the same ones, but that they've signed affidavits swearing to her condition. And Lord Ashford has convinced the council that your interest in her is, and Marcus paused, improper given her diminished capacity. The accusation was brilliant in its cruelty. It painted Lucien as a monster preying on a vulnerable woman, made his protection look like exploitation, turned every moment he'd spent with Seraphina into evidence of abuse rather than rescue. And if he fought it publicly, if he defended himself by exposing how they'd actually treated her, it would just make him look more desperate, more guilty. Lady Beatrice had planned this perfectly. She'd waited until he made his move, let him declare his interest publicly, then struck with accusations that would destroy him faster than any business rival ever could. Because the one thing more dangerous than being ruthless was being seen as a predator. What about Seraphina? Where is she now? Marcus's expression went carefully neutral. That's the other problem. She's missing. The temperature in the room dropped. What do you mean missing? Our guards reported her safely home at 3:30. By 6, when they checked in with the household staff, she was gone. Her room was empty. No note, no indication of where she went. Lucien's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Lady Beatrice had taken her somewhere they couldn't find, hidden her away to prevent her from testifying, or worse, convinced Seraphina that Lucien was exactly what the accusations claimed, a powerful man using her for his own purposes. He thought about their conversation last night, about her demanding he promise not to make her choose between existing on her own terms and existing under his protection, about how she'd said she'd choose herself every time. Maybe she had, Maybe she'd looked at the situation clearly and realized that being associated with him would destroy her more thoroughly than Lady Beatrice ever could. That his protection was just another kind of cage. That she was better off disappearing on her own terms than being used as ammunition in a war between aristocrats. The thought hit harder than it should have. "Your Grace." Marcus moved closer. "What are your orders?" Lucien stared out the window at the frost-covered grounds, at the territory he'd spent 10 years securing through fear and strategic brutality, at the power he'd built specifically so no one could take from him again, and realized none of it mattered if Seraphina was gone. Find her. Use every resource, every contact. I don't care what it costs. And the council summons? I'll deal with it. Your Grace, if you don't appear, they'll move against you immediately. Ashford has allies, men who've been waiting for an opportunity to cut you down. This gives them exactly what they need. Let them try." Marcus studied him with the expression of someone watching a brilliant strategist make a catastrophic mistake. "You're risking everything for a woman you met 3 days ago." "Yes." "Why?" "Because she reminded me what it felt like to be human instead of a weapon." The council chamber was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, dark wood. Portraits of past kings watching from the walls with expressions that suggested they'd seen this performance 1,000 times and weren't impressed. Lucien entered at precisely noon. 7 council members sat in a semicircle, Lord Ashford among them looking smug. Lord Chancellor Blackwood at the center, white-haired and sharp-eyed, the kind of political survivor who'd outlasted 3 monarchs by knowing exactly when to bend and when to break. Duke Ravenscar, Blackwood's voice carried through the chamber. "Thank you for appearing. Please state your relationship with Miss Seraphina Whitmore." Lucien remained standing. There are no chairs for the accused. Another power play. Another reminder that he was being judged. "I am acquainted with Miss Whitmore. I visited her at Whitmore Manor and invited her to dinner at Blackthorn Keep. For what purpose? To ensure she receives the respect and recognition she deserves as Sir Aldrich Whitmore's daughter." Lord Ashford leaned forward. "And it had nothing to do with the fact that she's been deemed mentally unfit by 3 qualified physicians? That she's vulnerable to manipulation?" Lucien looked at him with the expression that usually made men reconsider their choices. "I've seen no evidence of mental unfitness. What I have seen is a woman being isolated and silenced by family members who benefit from her disappearance." Ashford's face went red. "That's a slanderous accusation. Is it? Then produce Miss Whitmore. Let her speak for herself. Let the council determine whether she's unfit or simply inconvenient." Blackwood raised a hand for silence. "Miss Whitmore is currently indisposed. Her family physician has recommended she remain in seclusion until her condition stabilizes." "How convenient." Lucian's voice went cold. "She's indisposed at exactly the moment her testimony would be most relevant." Another council member spoke up. Lord Pemberton, the same man whose shipping contracts Lucian had destroyed. "Your Grace, these accusations are serious. Multiple witnesses have testified that you've pursued Miss Whitmore with unusual intensity, that you've threatened her family, that you've used your position to coerce her cooperation. Witnesses can be bought. Testimony can be fabricated. I'm sure Lord Ashford knows that better than most." Ashford stood. "I will not sit here and be accused, then leave." Lucien didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room went silent anyway. Because everyone present knew that beneath the titles and political theater, Lucien was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with social position. Blackwood studied Lucien carefully. "Your Grace, the council is prepared to drop this inquiry under certain conditions." There it was, the real purpose of this performance. Not justice. Negotiation. What conditions? "You will cease all contact with Miss Whitmore immediately. You will make a public statement acknowledging that your interest in her was misguided and that her family's concerns about her welfare are legitimate. And you will agree to a formal courtship with Lady Evelyn Ashford to demonstrate your commitment to appropriate social conduct." The terms were designed to humiliate him, force him to abandon Seraphina publicly, validate her family's abuse, and chain him to an alliance with the very people who'd orchestrated this attack. Lucien had spent 10 years making sure no one could force him into anything. He looked at Ashford, at Pemberton, at the other council members who'd clearly been promised favors or concessions in exchange for their cooperation. Then he did something that shocked them all. He smiled. "You're under the mistaken impression that I care about your inquiry. that I'm concerned about accusations from men whose moral authority wouldn't fill a thimble, that I'm willing to negotiate. Blackwood's expression hardened. Your Grace, you would be wise. I'm wise enough to know a coordinated attack when I see one. This isn't about protecting a vulnerable woman. It's about men who've wanted to diminish my influence, finding an excuse to do it. Ashford's voice shook with barely controlled rage. You think yourself above consequences, above the rule of law? No. I think myself capable of exposing every council member in this room who's accepted bribes, falsified testimony, or used their position to destroy political opponents. I think myself willing to go to war if that's what you're offering. The chamber erupted, men shouting over each other, accusations flying, order dissolving into chaos. Blackwood's voice cut through it all. Enough! Silence fell immediately. The Lord Chancellor stood. Duke Ravenscar. You are hereby suspended from all official duties pending a full investigation into these allegations. Your assets will be frozen, your access to royal functions revoked, and if Miss Whitmore is found to have suffered any harm as a result of your actions, you will answer for it personally. Lucien held Blackwood's gaze. Understood. One question. Proceed. Where is she? The silence that followed told him everything he needed to know. They didn't know. Seraphina had vanished, and they were just as desperate to find her as he was. Because, without her testimony, the entire case collapsed into hearsay and political theater. But with her, they could either prove Lucien was a predator or expose their own abuse. She'd made herself the most important piece on the board by disappearing completely, and Lucien had never been more terrified or more proud. He left the council chamber with his titles intact, but his power temporarily shattered. Guards followed at a distance. Not his guards, the king's men, ensuring he didn't flee, didn't attempt to interfere with their investigation. Marcus was waiting in the carriage. His face said everything before he spoke. No trace of her, Your Grace. We've searched every property, every contact, every place she might have gone. She planned this. The old steward nodded slowly. The question is why? Is she running from them or from you? Lucien thought about the letters. About Seraphina's absolute refusal to be owned by anyone. About how she'd survived 3 years of isolation by documenting her own existence because it was the only control she had. Both. She's running from all of us because we're all trying to use her for something. What will you do? Find her anyway. And this time, actually listen to what she wants. The carriage rolled through the capital toward Blackthorn Keep. Citizens stared as they passed. Word was already spreading. The Iron Duke brought low by accusations of impropriety. Political rivals would be celebrating. Business partners would be reconsidering their alliances. Everything Lucien had built was being tested, and he found he didn't care about any of it as much as he cared about finding one woman who'd decided all of them were equally dangerous. The attack came at dusk. Lucien was in his study reviewing property records, looking for any location Seraphina might have accessed, when the first window exploded inward. Glass shattered across the floor. A burning bottle rolled to a stop near the fireplace. He was moving before conscious thought caught up. Out of the study. Down the hall. Shouting for Marcus and the household guard. More windows shattered. More fire. Smoke billowing through corridors that had stood for 300 years. This wasn't random violence. This was coordinated. Professional. Someone had decided that if they couldn't destroy Lucien politically, they'd do it literally. Your Grace. Marcus appeared through the smoke, blood running from a cut above his eye. We're under attack. At least 20 men, armed. They've blocked the main gates. Lucien's mind shifted into the cold calculation that had kept him alive through a dozen political wars. How many of our guards? 15 present. The rest are out searching for Miss Whitmore. Not enough. Not against 20 professionals who'd clearly been planning this. Lucien grabbed Marcus's arm. Get the household staff out through the servant passages. All of them. Don't stop for anything. What about you? I'll buy you time, Your Grace. Go. Marcus hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into the smoke. Lucien grabbed a sword from the wall display. Decorative. Probably hadn't been used in actual combat in a century. But steel was steel, and he'd been trained to fight long before he'd learned to negotiate. The main hall was chaos. His guards fighting desperately against attackers who moved with military precision. Furniture overturned. Tapestries burning, blood on the marble floors that had been polished that morning. Lucien waded into it without hesitation. The first attacker came at him with a blade. Lucien parried, pivoted, drove his sword through the man's side, pulled it free and moved to the next one. Fighting felt cleaner than politics. More honest. At least in combat, you knew who wanted you dead. He was holding the central staircase when he saw her. Seraphina stood in the doorway to the main hall. She wore a plain traveling cloak over the midnight blue dress from last night. Her hair was disheveled, her face was pale, but her eyes were absolutely clear. And she wasn't alone. Lady Beatrice stood beside her, Evelyn on her other side, and behind them a dozen more armed men. Lucien's blood went cold. Seraphina met his gaze across the burning hall. Her expression was unreadable. Lady Beatrice smiled. It was the most vicious thing Lucien had ever seen. Your Grace, I believe we need to talk about my stepdaughter's future. The fighting stopped. Lucien's guards were surrounded, outnumbered, bleeding. They looked to him for orders. He couldn't take his eyes off Seraphina. She stood there between the women who'd imprisoned her and the man who'd promised to protect her. And her face showed nothing. No fear, no anger, no recognition of everything they'd shared the night before. Lucien understood with sudden, devastating clarity. She'd played him. Every letter, every vulnerability, every moment of connection had been a performance designed to make him care, to make him reckless, to give Lady Beatrice exactly the weapon she needed to destroy him. He'd been so focused on saving her that he'd never considered she might not need saving, that she might be just as ruthless as he was, just as willing to use people to survive. Lady Beatrice moved forward. Lower your weapon, Your Grace, unless you want to watch your household burn with everyone inside. Lucien's hand tightened on the sword. He could keep fighting, take as many of them with him as possible, die the way his brother had died, violently, pointlessly, proving that power meant nothing when you were outnumbered. Or he could surrender, love, and figure out what the hell had just happened. He looked at Seraphina one more time, searching for something. Anything that suggested the woman who'd kissed him last night was still in there. Her eyes were empty. Lucien dropped the sword. It clattered on the marble with a sound like finality. Lady Beatrice gestured to her men. Restrain him, and make sure none of his guards interfere. They moved quickly, professional, binding Lucien's hands behind his back, while his own guards were forced to watch. One of them started to protest. Lucien shook his head once, hard. The guard went silent. Lady Beatrice circled Lucien slowly. You really thought you could challenge me, threaten my family, use your power to steal what belonged to us? Seraphina doesn't belong to anyone. Lady Beatrice laughed, still clinging to that fantasy. How noble, how foolish. She turned to Seraphina. Tell him, darling, tell the Duke what you told me this morning. Seraphina stepped forward. Her voice was calm, controlled, the same precision from her letters. I told her that I've been planning this for 6 months, that I knew eventually someone powerful enough would take an interest, someone I could use to escape. I just needed to make him care enough to be reckless. The words landed like physical blows. Lucien stared at her. You used me, the same way you used me, for your own purposes, to prove your power, to show the world you could save someone. She moved closer. Her eyes were cold. You told yourself it was about justice, about protecting me. But it was always about you, about the Duke of Ravenscar proving he was stronger than everyone else. That's not, isn't it? You never asked what I wanted. You decided. You commanded. You made choices for me the same way my stepmother did. The only difference was you wrapped it in pretty words about freedom and recognition. Lucien's mind raced back through every interaction, every letter, every moment he'd thought he was seeing the real her. Had any of it been real, or had she been manipulating him from the first word? Lady Beatrice put a hand on Seraphina's shoulder. Possessive, triumphant. My stepdaughter's far more intelligent than you gave her credit for. She understood that her isolation was temporary, that eventually someone would find those letters. She just needed to write them well enough to hook the right kind of predator. And you were perfect, Seraphina said. Powerful, ruthless, desperate for something to care about after a decade of emotional isolation. I just had to give you someone to save and you did the rest yourself. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She'd turned his protection into a weapon, his care into evidence of manipulation, made him believe she was a victim when really she'd been the one setting the trap the entire time. Why? His voice came out rougher than he intended. What do you get from this? Everything. Seraphina's smile was sharp. My stepmother has agreed to emancipate me legally, give me full access to my father's inheritance, allow me to establish my own household. In exchange, I testify that you coerced me, manipulated me, used your position to exploit a vulnerable woman. And you agreed. Of course I agreed. Because unlike you, I understand that survival isn't about honor or justice. It's about using whatever tools you have to get what you need. You taught me that. All those letters about power and control, about becoming exactly as ruthless as necessary to survive. I never said, you didn't have to. Your entire existence is the lesson. The Iron Duke who crushed anyone who threatened him, who built an empire on fear and strategic brutality. I just applied the same principles. Lady Beatrice gestured to her men. Take him to the cellars. We'll hold him until the king's guards arrive. By morning, the Duke of Ravenscar will be answering for crimes that will strip him of everything he's built. They dragged Lucien toward the cellar stairs. He didn't fight, didn't resist. His mind was still trying to process what had happened. Seraphina had been right about one thing. He'd never asked what she wanted. He'd assumed, decided, made her into exactly what he needed her to be. A victim he could save. A purpose that made his power feel like something other than elaborate cruelty. And she'd used that assumption to destroy him completely. As they pushed him down into the darkness beneath Blackthorn Keep, Lucien realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. You didn't survive 3 years of isolation by being weak or passive. You survived by learning exactly how to make people underestimate you, by turning invisibility into a weapon, by becoming exactly as ruthless as the people trying to destroy you. Seraphina hadn't needed saving. She'd needed a fool powerful enough to be useful. And Lucien had volunteered for the role with enthusiasm. The cellar door slammed shut above him, locked, sealed, buried beneath his own fortress in darkness that felt familiar. Like coming home to something he'd been running from for 10 years, vulnerability. The knowledge that caring about anything made you a target. That power was only protection if you never let anyone close enough to use it against you. His brother had tried to teach him that. Adrian had warned him that becoming invulnerable meant becoming alone. That walls built to keep pain out also kept everything else out. Lucien had learned the lesson too well. And now a woman who'd spent 3 years studying survival from inside a cage had shown him exactly what happened when someone smarter and more desperate turned those same walls into a prison. He sat in the darkness and laughed. Because what else was there to do? He'd been outmaneuvered by someone he'd underestimated, destroyed by someone he'd tried to save. And the worst part was, he couldn't even be angry about it. Because Seraphina was right. He'd never asked what she wanted. He just assumed his power made him right, that his intentions justified his actions, that saving her gave him the right to decide her future. She taught him the truth, the same way the world had taught him when his brother died. Power without understanding was just another kind of blindness. And he'd been blind from the moment he opened her first letter. Above him, Blackthorn Keep burned. Below him, darkness pressed close. And somewhere between the two, Lucien Ravenscar finally understood what it meant to lose everything by trying too hard to protect it. The only question now was whether he'd learned the lesson in time to survive what came next, or whether Seraphina had already won so completely that survival was no longer an option. Darkness had a weight when you were buried beneath your own fortress. Lucien sat with his back against cold stone, hands still bound, listening to the sounds of Blackthorn Keep dying above him. Timbers cracking, glass shattering, the organized chaos of men looting centuries of history while the woman he'd tried to protect watched it burn. He'd stopped struggling after the first hour, stopped testing the ropes, stopped looking for weaknesses in the cellar door. Because the truth was simpler and more devastating than any physical trap. He'd been outplayed by someone smarter, someone who understood that the most dangerous predators were the ones who convinced you they were prey. Footsteps on the stairs, light bleeding down from above. Lucien didn't move, didn't bother looking up. If they were coming to kill him, there wasn't much point in ceremony. The door opened. Torchlight flooded the cellar. Seraphina stood in the doorway alone. She descended slowly, carefully, like she was approaching something that might still be dangerous despite being bound. When she reached the bottom, she set the torch in a wall sconce and studied him with those sharp eyes that had seen through everything from the beginning. Come to gloat? Her voice was quiet. Come to make sure you understand. I understand perfectly. You played me, used my arrogance against me, made me believe I was saving you when really I was just another tool in your escape plan. Seraphina crouched so they were eye level. That's not the whole truth. Then enlighten me. She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried something he hadn't heard before. Exhaustion. Everything I told you upstairs was a lie. Lucien's eyes snapped to hers. What? The performance. The partnership with my stepmother. The claim that I manipulated you from the beginning. All of it was theater designed to keep you alive. He stared at her, searching for the deception, the angle, the reason she'd bother lying now when she'd already won. You're not making sense. Lady Beatrice didn't find me this morning. I went to her. Seraphina's hands were shaking. She hid them in her cloak. I told her I'd testify against you, say whatever she wanted, help destroy your reputation completely, in exchange for one thing. What? Your life. The words hung in the smoky air between them. Lucien's mind raced back through the scene upstairs. Seraphina's cold eyes, her cruel words, the way she'd positioned herself between him and Lady Beatrice's men, not as an ally, as a shield. She'd made herself the thing they wanted more than his death. Why would you do that? Because you were right about something last night. I do see through everything, including what my stepmother was planning. Seraphina stood and paced the small cellar. She didn't just want to discredit you politically, she wanted you dead. A convenient accident during the attack on Blackthorn Keep. The investigation would have found your body in the ruins and concluded you died resisting arrest. And you stopped her. I gave her something better. Complete victory. Your reputation destroyed, your power stripped. And me, the poor manipulated victim, finally free to testify about how the terrible Duke of Ravenscar coerced me. She gets everything she wants without the mess of an actual murder investigation. Lucien studied her carefully. If this is true, why tell me now? Why not let me believe I was used and discarded? Seraphina turned to face him. Because I need you to understand what comes next. My stepmother thinks she's won, that I'm her grateful stepdaughter finally seeing reason, that she controls the narrative. But she's wrong. About what? About me. About you. About everything that's about to happen. She pulled a knife from her cloak and cut the ropes binding his wrists. Lucien rubbed feeling back into his hands, watching her warily. This could still be another layer of manipulation, another performance designed to make him trust her before the final betrayal. But something in her eyes was different now, not cold calculation, something raw and desperate that looked uncomfortably like the truth. What's your plan? Seraphina handed him the knife. We burn it all down. The lies. The performance. The entire structure they've built to control people like us. But we do it my way. Not with your power, not with brute force, with the one thing they can't fight. What? Evidence. Seraphina pulled folded papers from inside her cloak. While they were celebrating upstairs, I was in my stepmother's study. She keeps meticulous records, every bribe, every falsified testimony, every contract she's manipulated to maintain control of my father's estate. It's all here. Lucien took the papers and scanned them by torchlight. His eyes widened. This is enough to destroy her, to expose half the council members who supported today's attack. I know. But if we use it the way you'd use it, through official channels and political pressure, they'll bury it, call it forgery, discredit both of us before the truth matters. Seraphina moved closer. We need something bigger, something public enough that they can't contain it. What are you proposing? The Winter Assembly. 3 days from now. Every noble house in the kingdom will be gathered at the palace, including the king himself. We present this evidence there, in front of everyone. Make it impossible to ignore or suppress. They'll arrest us the moment we try. Only if we give them the chance. Seraphina's smile was sharp and dangerous. I've spent 3 years studying how power works from the outside, how aristocrats destroy each other. The key isn't avoiding their attacks, it's making yourself too valuable to destroy. And how do we do that? By making them need our silence more than they want our deaths. Lucien stood slowly. His body ached from the fight earlier. Burns on his hands from the fire. Bruises from being thrown down the cellar stairs. But his mind was working again. Seeing angles. Possibilities. The cold strategic thinking that had kept him alive through a decade of political warfare. This is insane, even if we escape this cellar. Even if we somehow make it to the Winter Assembly without being arrested. Even if we present this evidence publicly, they'll still try to kill us. Probably. Seraphina met his eyes. But at least we'll die making them pay for it. The laugh that escaped Lucien was genuine. half mad but genuine. You really are dangerous. I learned from the best. They stood in the torchlight planning treason, or justice, or revenge. The line between them had stopped mattering somewhere around. The moment Lucien realized the woman he'd tried to save was actually the one saving him. One question. His voice went quiet. Why? You could have left me here. Taken your stepmother's deal. Been free without the risk of everything that comes next. Seraphina's expression shifted. Something vulnerable breaking through the armor. Because everything you said last night was true. About people conquering by making someone disappear quietly. About survival not being the same as living. About power without purpose being just elaborate cruelty. I thought you said that was all manipulation. It was supposed to be. Seraphina looked away. I was supposed to use you and discard you, take what I needed and walk away clean. But somewhere between the letters and the library and watching you face down my entire family without flinching, I made a mistake. What mistake? I started believing you actually saw me, not as a victim, not as a tool, just as someone who refused to disappear despite everything trying to erase me. Lucien moved closer. His hand found hers in the shadows. That wasn't a mistake. Yes, it was. Because now I can't walk away. Can't take the safe option. Can't pretend that going back to being invisible is acceptable just because it's survivable. Good. She looked up at him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears and furious determination. This is going to destroy us. You understand that. Even if we win, even if we expose every corrupt noble in the kingdom, they'll never forgive us for it. We'll spend the rest of our lives being hunted. I've spent the last decade being hunted. At least this time I'll have company. Seraphina kissed him, hard and desperate and nothing like the careful performance from before. This was two people who'd been buried alive in different ways, recognizing that sometimes the only way out was to claw through the dirt together. When they broke apart, Lucien could hear voices above. Guards changing shifts. Someone shouting orders about securing the perimeter before the king's men arrived at dawn. We need to move. How do we get out of here? Seraphina pulled him toward the far wall. There's a servant's passage behind the wine racks. It connects to the old siege tunnels beneath the keep. Your own people probably don't even know it exists. How do you know? Because while you were busy being the Duke of Ravenscar, I was reading your family history in the library. Your great-grandfather built these tunnels during the Civil War, just in case the fortress was ever overrun. And you memorized the layout from books. I told you, invisible people learn everything. They moved the wine racks carefully, quietly. Behind them was a narrow opening that looked like it hadn't been used in generations. Seraphina went through first. Lucien followed, pulling the racks back into place behind them. The tunnel was pitch black. Water dripped from somewhere above. The air tasted like mineral deposits and old fear. They moved by touch, Seraphina leading with the confidence of someone who'd studied the route until she could walk it blind. After what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, pale light appeared ahead. Fresh air. The tunnel opened into a ravine half a mile from Blackthorn Keep. Lucien could see smoke rising from his fortress against the pre-dawn sky. 300 years of history burning while Lady Beatrice and her allies celebrated below. The rage that filled him was cold and precise, the kind of anger that didn't explode. It planned. It calculated. It found the most effective way to make sure this never happened again. Seraphina touched his arm. I know what you're thinking, that you want to go back, fight them all, die making sure they pay. The thought had crossed my mind. Don't. Because that's what they expect, what they're prepared for. The Duke of Ravenscar responding with violence. They have men, weapons, legal authority. If we fight them on those terms, we lose. Then what do you suggest? We disappear. For 3 days. Let them think you're dead in the rubble. Let them celebrate their victory. And while they're busy congratulating themselves, we prepare to destroy them in the one arena where violence doesn't matter. Public opinion. Exactly. Seraphina started walking down the ravine. Her midnight blue dress was filthy, torn at the hem, but she moved with purpose. We have 3 days to turn you from a disgraced duke into a martyr, to turn me from a manipulated victim into a witness, to turn this evidence into something too powerful to suppress. And how exactly do we do that? With the help of people who have as much reason to hate the council as we do. They walked through the pre-dawn cold toward the city. Lucien had no title now, no guards, no power beyond what he could carry in his own 2 hands. Everything he'd built over 10 years was ash and political maneuvering, and somehow he felt more alive than he had in a decade. Because Seraphina was right, fighting on their terms meant losing. But changing the game entirely meant there was a chance. A slim, desperate, probably suicidal chance. But still a chance. They reached the outer district of the capital as the sun rose. Seraphina led them through back alleys and side streets with the kind of knowledge that came from years of watching the city from windows. She knew which neighborhoods housed displaced merchants, which areas held people who'd been destroyed by noble power plays and political corruption, the kind of people who'd help bring down the aristocracy if given half a chance. She stopped at a boarding house that looked one strong wind away from collapse. Knocked 3 times, waited, knocked twice more. The door opened. An old woman peered out. Her eyes widened when she saw Seraphina. "Miss Vale, we thought you were dead." "Not yet, Mrs. Chen, but I need your help. Both of us do." The woman looked at Lucien. Recognition flickered across her face. "That's the Duke of... Former Duke." Lucien kept his voice level. "And currently wanted by the King's Council for crimes I didn't commit." Mrs. Chen studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Get inside, both of you, before someone sees." The boarding house was cramped but clean. Mrs. Chen led them to a back room where a dozen people were gathered around a table covered in documents and maps. They all turned when the door opened. Lucien recognized some of them. Merchants whose businesses had been destroyed by Lord Pemberton's trade manipulations. A former magistrate who'd been removed for refusing to falsify evidence. A journalist who'd been blacklisted for publishing stories about aristocratic corruption. People who'd been crushed by the same system that was currently trying to destroy him and Seraphina. Mrs. Chen gestured to them. "I think you all know who these two are. The question is, what are they doing here?" Seraphina stepped forward. She looked like she'd been through a war, filthy, exhausted, but her voice was steady and absolutely certain. "We're here because we have evidence that can destroy the people who've been destroying you. Bank records, falsified testimony, proof of every corrupt deal the council has made for the last 5 years." The journalist, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, leaned forward. "Why would you share this with us? Your nobility, part of the system." "I was." Lucien moved to stand beside Seraphina, "until I made the mistake of caring about something other than maintaining power. Now, I'm exactly where you are. Targeted, discredited, hunted by people who think their positions make them untouchable. And you want revenge," the former magistrate said flatly. "I want justice. There's a difference." "Is there?" Lucien looked at the evidence spread across their table. Cases they'd been documenting. Names of people destroyed by the aristocracy's casual cruelty. He recognized patterns. The same tactics used against him and Seraphina deployed against anyone who threatened the established order. "I used to think survival meant becoming stronger than everyone else. Building walls so high nothing could touch me. Crushing threats before they became dangers." He met each person's eyes. "But I was wrong. Because that kind of strength just makes you another version of the thing you're trying to survive." "Then what's the alternative?" Mrs. Chen's voice was sharp. Seraphina answered. "Making them afraid of us, not because we're more powerful, but because we're willing to expose what they've hidden, because we have nothing left to lose and everything to gain." The room went silent. The journalist spoke first. "The Winter Assembly. You want to present this evidence at the Winter Assembly, in front of the king, in front of every noble house, in front of enough witnesses that they can't bury it." Seraphina's hands were steady now. "But we can't do it alone. We need help getting into the palace, distributing copies of the evidence before they can seize it, making sure the truth spreads too fast to contain. You're asking us to commit treason. I'm asking you to help us burn down a system that's been crushing people like you for generations." Lucien's voice was quiet, but it carried. "I can't promise we'll survive. I can't promise we'll win. But I can promise that if we do this right, they'll never feel safe again." The former magistrate laughed. It was a broken sound. "You're insane, both of you. This will get us all killed." "Probably." Seraphina didn't flinch. "But at least we'll die making them pay for it." The same words she'd said to Lucien in the cellar. The same cold certainty that came from understanding survival sometimes meant choosing how you went down rather than whether you fell. Mrs. Chen stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city waking up to another day of quiet oppression and casual cruelty disguised as social order. When she turned back, her expression was decided. I lost my husband to Lord Ashford's business manipulations. He jumped from a bridge rather than face debtor's prison. So, yes, I'll help you burn them down. One by one, the others nodded. The journalist, the magistrate, a woman who'd lost her children to a labor scheme run by council members, a man whose sister had been disappeared for refusing a noble's advances, people who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain from watching the aristocracy bleed. Seraphina spread the evidence across the table. This is everything. Bank transfers showing bribes paid to council members. Testimony from physicians who never examined me but signed documents declaring me unfit. Contracts proving Lady Beatrice has been embezzling from my father's estate for 3 years. The journalist started organizing documents. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. We'll need multiple copies. Distribution points throughout the assembly. Trusted people who can spread these faster than the guards can confiscate them. And we'll need a distraction. The magistrate looked at Lucien. Something big enough that they can't suppress the evidence without looking guilty. Lucien felt the familiar cold calculation settling over him. The strategic mind that had built an empire now turned toward tearing one down. I'll give them a distraction. The Duke of Ravenscar returning from the dead to accuse the council of attempted murder. They'll arrest you the moment you appear. Only if they can reach me before I've said enough to make their denials look like confession. Seraphina grabbed his arm. This is suicide. You're talking about walking into a room full of people who want you dead and daring them to try. I know. Then why? Because someone has to stand there and make them look at what they've done. Has to force them to kill me publicly or admit I was right. Either way, the truth gets out. The room went quiet again. Everyone understanding what he was actually proposing. Not revenge. Martyrdom. The kind of sacrifice that turned political corruption into public outrage. Seraphina's grip tightened. No. We do this together or not at all. If we're both in that room, they'll just kill us both. Then we make sure they can't. Her eyes were fierce. We don't give them a target they can hit. We spread the evidence so thoroughly that killing us just proves we were right. We turn ourselves into the thing they can't afford to destroy. How? By making sure everyone in that assembly knows exactly what we have before we ever set foot inside. Seraphina turned to the journalist. Can you publish this? Tonight, before the assembly. Make sure every noble house receives copies. He nodded slowly. It'll cost me my press. Maybe my life. I know. Which is why I'm not asking you to do it for free. Seraphina pulled another document from her cloak. This is the deed to Whitmore Manor, my father's estate. Everything Lady Beatrice has been stealing for 3 years. If we survive this, it's yours, all of you, to do with as you choose. That's a fortune. That's payment for helping us destroy people who've turned corruption into inheritance. Mrs. Chen smiled. It was vicious and satisfied. We accept. The next 3 days moved like a fever dream. Lucien and Seraphina worked with people who had every reason to betray them, but didn't, because hatred of the aristocracy ran deeper than individual survival. The journalists printed evidence on underground presses, distributed copies to servants who moved through noble households invisible and ignored. By the second day, whispers were spreading through the capital that the Duke of Ravenscar wasn't dead, that he had proof of massive corruption, that the winter assembly was going to become a bloodbath. Lady Beatrice tried to suppress the rumors, sent guards to raid the boarding houses and printing shops, but the evidence had spread too far, too fast, like wildfire through dry timber. On the third morning, Lucien stood in Mrs. Chen's boarding house wearing borrowed clothes that didn't fit quite right. He looked nothing like the Duke of Ravenscar. Just another displaced aristocrat who'd lost everything, exactly what he needed to be. Seraphina entered wearing a plain gray dress. Her hair was pinned back simply. No jewelry, no ornamentation. She looked like every other forgotten daughter in the capital, which made her the most dangerous person in the city. Ready? Lucien checked the knife at his belt, the papers inside his coat, the determination that had replaced fear somewhere between the cellar and this moment. As I'll ever be. They'll try to kill us. I know. We might not survive the day. I know that too. Seraphina moved close. Her hand found his. Then why are we doing this? Lucien thought about his brother. About 10 years of building walls so high nothing could reach him. About a woman who'd spent 3 years documenting her own disappearance because it was the only control she had. About the fact that power without purpose was just elaborate cruelty, because some things are worth dying for. And making sure they never bury anyone alive again is one of them. They left the boarding house as the sun climbed toward noon. The winter assembly would begin in 2 hours. Every noble house, every council member, the king himself, all gathered to celebrate another year of unchallenged power. They had no idea what was coming. Lucian and Seraphina walked through the capital toward the palace. Behind them, dozens of people moved with purpose, distributing evidence, positioning themselves throughout the assembly hall, preparing to turn aristocratic celebration into public trial. At the palace gates, guards stopped them. Names and business. Lucian looked at Seraphina. She nodded once. He pulled back his hood. The guard's eyes went wide. You're supposed to be dead? Lucian's voice was calm. I know, inconvenient timing, but I have business with the King's Council that can't wait. Sir, we have orders to arrest you on sight, then arrest me. But do it inside, in front of everyone. Let the king see you dragging the Duke of Ravenscar in chains based on accusations from people who tried to murder him. The guards hesitated, looking at each other, understanding they were caught between orders that suddenly looked a lot more complicated than simple arrest. Seraphina stepped forward. I'm Seraphina Whitmore, daughter of Sir Aldrich, the woman your council claims was manipulated by this man. I'm here to testify, unless you'd like to explain to His Majesty why you prevented a key witness from presenting evidence. The head guard's hand was on his sword, but he didn't draw it. His orders said arrest, not kill. And killing someone in front of the palace gates created exactly the kind of public spectacle that would raise questions. Fine. Inside. But you're both under guard until the council decides what to do with you. Perfect. Lucian smiled. That's exactly what we're counting on. They walked through the palace gates surrounded by guards, every step taking them closer to the assembly hall, closer to the confrontation that would either expose the corruption eating the kingdom from inside or end with their deaths proving nothing. The doors to the great hall stood open. Music drifted out, laughter, the sound of people who believed themselves untouchable celebrating their own power. Lucian and Seraphina stood at the threshold. Inside waited everyone who'd tried to destroy them. Lady Beatrice, Lord Ashford, the council members who'd conspired to strip Lucian of everything, the king who'd allowed it to happen. All of them about to discover what happened when people with nothing left to lose decided truth mattered more than survival. Seraphina's hand tightened on his. Last chance to run. Lucian looked at her. At the woman who'd spent 3 years invisible and was about to become the most visible person in the kingdom, who'd turned her imprisonment into a weapon and her survival into rebellion, who'd reminded him that some cages were worth breaking even if the breaking killed you. No more running. They stepped inside together. The music stopped. Every head turned. And the Duke of Ravenscar, risen from the dead and stripped of everything except the truth, walked into the center of the winter assembly with a woman they'd tried to erase beside him, ready to burn it all down. The silence that followed their entrance was the kind that preceded violence or revelation. Lucian had learned to recognize the difference over 10 years of political warfare. This was both. Every face in the winter assembly turned toward them. Nobles in silk and velvet. Council members who'd spent 3 days celebrating his death. Lady Beatrice standing near the king's dais, her face draining of color so fast Lucian thought she might collapse. Lord Ashford beside her, hand moving toward the sword he probably hadn't drawn in 20 years. And at the center of it all, seated on a throne that had witnessed 3 centuries of lies disguised as governance, King Edward III watched with eyes that had seen too many similar performances to be shocked by one more. The king raised one hand. The hall fell silent instantly. That particular gesture had ended debates and started wars. Today it just bought Lucian and Seraphina enough time to speak before the guards dragged them out. Duke Ravenscar. The king's voice carried through the vast space without effort. We were informed you perished in the attack on Blackthorn Keep. Your presence suggests either miraculous resurrection or highly inconvenient survival. The latter, Your Majesty. Lucian kept his voice level. Though the distinction matters less than why someone wanted me dead, badly enough to burn 300 years of history to accomplish it. Bold words from a man accused of manipulating a vulnerable woman for personal gain. Then perhaps Miss Whitmore should speak for herself. Lucien gestured to Seraphina. Since she's the one everyone claims is too fragile to make her own decisions. Seraphina stepped forward. She looked nothing like the forgotten daughter who'd written letters in an attic. Nothing like the woman who'd been locked away for 3 years. She carried herself like someone who'd survived burial and learned that the only thing more terrifying than being invisible was finally being seen. Your Majesty, my name is Seraphina Vale Whitmore, daughter of Sir Aldrich Whitmore. For 3 years, my stepmother has kept me imprisoned in my own home under false claims of mental illness. She's embezzled my inheritance, falsified physician testimony. And when the Duke of Ravenscar attempted to expose this abuse, she orchestrated an attack designed to kill him and blame his death on political enemies. Lady Beatrice's voice cut through the hall like broken glass. Lies. All lies. Your Majesty, this woman is delusional. She's been manipulated by... Lucien pulled the documents from his coat and held them high. Then explained these. Bank records showing payments from Lady Beatrice to 3 council members in exchange for their support. Physician affidavits signed by doctors who never examined Miss Whitmore. Contracts proving systematic theft from the Whitmore estate. He threw the papers into the air. They scattered across the marble floor like evidence raining down on corruption that had gone unchallenged too long. Guards moved immediately. But the journalists' network had positioned themselves throughout the hall. More documents appeared. Copies spreading through the crowd faster than the guards could confiscate them. Nobles picked them up, read them, passed them to others with expressions shifting from curiosity to shock to carefully concealed fear. Because some of those documents implicated more than just Lady Beatrice and her immediate allies. They exposed a web of corruption that touched half the families present. Bribes, falsified evidence, coordinated destruction of rivals. All the mechanisms aristocracy used to maintain power while pretending civilization and law mattered. Lord Ashford was shouting. Lord Pemberton was demanding the guards arrest everyone distributing evidence. Other council members were trying to speak over each other. The carefully orchestrated performance of the Winter Assembly dissolving into chaos. The king stood. Silence fell again. Not instantly this time, gradually, like water draining from a broken vessel. Edward descended from his dais slowly. He was 70, but moved with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime surviving court politics by knowing exactly when to act and when to watch others destroy themselves. He walked to where the documents lay scattered and picked one up. Read it carefully. Set it down, and picked up another. His face showed nothing, but Lucien had spent enough time studying power to recognize when someone was making calculations that would reshape kingdoms. These are serious accusations. The king's voice was quiet, which means they require serious investigation. Guards, place Lady Beatrice and Lord Ashford under house arrest pending review of these documents. Your Majesty, this is outrageous. Ashford started. What's outrageous is using your position on my council to orchestrate attempted murder. Edward's voice went cold. What's outrageous is falsifying physician testimony to imprison a woman whose only crime was being inconveniently intelligent. What's outrageous is thinking I wouldn't eventually notice corruption this blatant. The guards moved toward Lady Beatrice. She backed away, looking around desperately for allies. But the nobles who'd supported her 3 days ago were suddenly very interested in the floor, the ceiling. Anything except meeting her eyes, because that's what happened when power collapsed. Everyone who'd benefited from it scattered like rats fleeing a sinking vessel. Loyalty lasted exactly as long as advantage. The moment association became liability, aristocrats remembered they barely knew each other's names. Lady Beatrice's eyes found Seraphina. You ungrateful little wretch. After everything I did for you, giving you a home, protecting you from your own weakness. Seraphina's voice was steady. You locked me in an attic and stole my inheritance. You convinced everyone I was insane so no one would question why Sir Aldrich's daughter vanished from society. You tried to erase me because I threatened your control. I saved you from yourself, from becoming something unnatural. Women like you need guidance, structure, someone to make decisions because you're incapable of... Seraphina crossed the distance between them in 3 steps. Her hand cracked across Lady Beatrice's face with a sound that echoed through the silent hall. I am not incapable. I am not fragile. I am not any of the things you called me to justify treating me like property. Her voice shook but didn't break. I am the daughter of a man who taught me to think, to observe, to understand that people like you only have power because people like me are taught to be quiet. Guards restrained Lady Beatrice before she could retaliate, dragged her backward while she screamed about ingratitude and manipulation and everything she'd sacrificed. As if imprisonment could be reframed as generosity, as if theft could become protection through sheer repetition. Lord Ashford went quietly. He understood the game better, knew that fighting now just made the inevitable worse. He'd gamble on investigations being slow, on evidence disappearing, on the aristocracy's tendency to protect its own overriding temporary outrage. But Lucien had planned for that too. Your Majesty? He pulled one more document from his coat. This is a full accounting of every corrupt transaction documented in the last 5 years. Not just Lady Beatrice's crimes. Everyone who participated in the system that enabled them. I'm presenting it publicly because private investigations have a tendency to reach convenient conclusions. The king took the document. Read the first page. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. This implicates half my council. Yes. You understand what you're doing. This isn't just exposing corruption. This is destabilizing the entire power structure of the kingdom. I understand perfectly. Lucien met the king's eyes. I also understand that structures built on lies eventually collapse whether you want them to or not. The only question is whether they fall in a controlled way or take everything down with them. Edward studied him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was too quiet for anyone else to hear. You were supposed to be one of them. The next generation of ruthless aristocrats keeping the machine running through fear and strategic brutality. What happened? I met someone who reminded me that survival isn't the same as living, that power without purpose is just elaborate cruelty, that becoming invulnerable meant becoming exactly what I hated. The king glanced at Seraphina. She did all that? No. She just refused to disappear when everyone tried to erase her. The rest I figured out myself. Edward stepped back, raised his voice so the entire assembly could hear. This evidence will be investigated thoroughly. By magistrates not mentioned in these documents, every accusation will be examined, every transaction verified. And anyone found guilty of the corruption detailed here will answer for it regardless of title or family name. The hall erupted again. Protests, denials, nobles trying to distance themselves from implicated colleagues. The careful hierarchy of aristocratic power fracturing in real time, as everyone calculated whether association or abandonment served their interests better. Lucien watched it happen with the detachment of someone who'd stopped caring about the game. He'd spent 10 years playing by these rules, building power, crushing threats, maintaining the same system he was now helping destroy. And the strange thing was, he didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel victorious, just tired. Like watching a machine you'd spent your life maintaining finally grind to a halt and realizing you were relieved it was over. Seraphina touched his arm. We should go. Before they decide we're more dangerous alive than dead. She was right. The king had given them temporary protection by ordering investigation. But investigation meant scrutiny. Questions about how they'd gathered evidence, who'd helped them, whether their methods were legal or just slightly less corrupt than the system they'd exposed. And aristocrats forgave many things, but they never forgave people who made them look foolish in front of each other. They walked toward the exit. Guards didn't stop them this time. Everyone too busy trying to manage the chaos to worry about 2 people who'd already detonated their bomb. Outside, the winter air tasted clean, cold but clean, like breathing after years underwater. Seraphina leaned against the palace wall, started laughing. The sound was half hysteria, half relief. We actually did it. We walked in there and burned it all down. Lucien joined her. His own laughter felt rusty, unpracticed. We're probably going to regret it. Probably. But at least we'll regret it together. They stood in the cold watching nobles flee the assembly, carriages arriving to collect families trying to distance themselves from the scandal. The entire machinery of aristocratic power scrambling to survive exposure. Mrs. Chen appeared from the crowd. Behind her came the journalist, the magistrate, and a dozen others who'd risked everything to help. Their faces showed exhaustion and fierce satisfaction. It's done? The journalist asked. It started. Lucien handed him the deed to Whitmore Manor that Seraphina had promised. The rest is up to people willing to follow through, to make sure investigations actually happen instead of disappearing into convenient conclusions. We'll make sure. Mrs. Chen took the deed with hands that trembled slightly. Even if it costs us everything, it probably will. Seraphina's voice was gentle. They'll come after anyone associated with this. Try to discredit you, destroy your credibility. Make sure the truth gets buried under enough controversy that people stop caring. Let them try. The magistrate's smile was grim. We've survived their attacks before. At least this time we're not doing it alone. They left in different directions, disappearing back into the city that had crushed them once and would probably try again. But something had changed, some fundamental shift in the balance between people with power and people with nothing left to lose. Lucian and Seraphina walked through the capital as evening fell. No destination, no plan beyond surviving the next few hours. They destroyed Lady Beatrice, exposed the council's corruption, forced the king to acknowledge that the system was broken. But they'd also made themselves targets for everyone who benefited from that system staying intact. Where do we go now? Seraphina asked quietly. Lucian thought about Blackthorn Keep, about the fortress that had been his sanctuary and prison for 10 years. It was probably still burning. Even if it wasn't, returning there meant returning to being the Duke of Ravenscar, to the isolation and fear-based power that had kept him safe and empty. He looked at the woman beside him, the one who'd spent 3 years invisible and then chosen to become the most visible person in the kingdom, who'd turned her survival into rebellion and her imprisonment into a weapon that had helped topple an empire. Somewhere new. Somewhere that isn't defined by who we were or what we've lost. Just somewhere we can figure out who we want to become. And if they come after us, then we'll deal with it, together. They found rooms in a boarding house on the edge of the capital. Nothing like the luxury Lucian had known. Nothing like the prison Seraphina had escaped. Just clean beds and a door that locked from the inside and windows that opened onto a street where no one knew their names or cared about their titles. That night, Lucian sat by the window watching the city. Seraphina joined him after a while, wrapping a blanket around both of them against the cold. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Everything you gave up, the power, the fortress, the certainty that came from being feared." Lucian thought about the question seriously, about 10 years of building walls, of crushing threats, of surviving by making sure he never cared about anything enough to be destroyed by losing it, about how empty that survival had actually been. "No. I regret how long it took me to realize that becoming invulnerable just meant becoming alone. That power without connection is just elaborate isolation. That I spent 10 years protecting myself from pain by refusing to feel anything else either. What changed? You. Your letters. The way you documented your own disappearance because it was the only control you had. It reminded me that my brother used to say the same thing before he died. That survival without purpose was just slow death with better furniture." Seraphina leaned against him. "I spent 3 years invisible, watching life happen through floorboards while everyone pretended I didn't exist. And I told myself I was surviving, enduring, waiting for rescue. But you weren't waiting. No. I was planning, studying, learning exactly how power worked so that when the opportunity came, I could dismantle it from the inside." Her voice went quiet. "I used you. At first. Saw you as a tool, a powerful man desperate enough to be manipulated into helping me escape. I know. Does that bother you?" Lucian considered it. Seraphina had been ruthless, strategic, willing to sacrifice him to achieve her goals. Everything he would have done in her position. Everything he had done countless times over the last decade. The difference was she'd changed course, chosen to save him when it would have been safer to let him die. Risked everything they'd built to make sure they went into that assembly together instead of her walking away clean. It would have bothered the man I was 3 days ago. The Duke of Ravenscar who thought survival meant never trusting anyone. But that man was an idiot who'd built a fortress so secure he forgot what it felt like to actually live inside it. What about now? Now I'm just grateful you decided I was worth saving despite every strategic reason to let me burn. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the city continued. People living lives that had nothing to do with aristocratic power plays or political corruption. Just existence, survival, the slow accumulation of moments that somehow added up to meaning. "What happens tomorrow?" Seraphina asked. "Tomorrow the investigations start. They'll call us to testify. Try to poke holes in our evidence. Look for ways to discredit us without directly calling us liars. And after that, After that depends on whether the king actually wants change or just wants the appearance of addressing corruption, whether the aristocracy closes ranks to protect itself or fractures under the weight of exposed lies. Do you think we'll survive it? Lucian thought about the question honestly. They'd made powerful enemies, exposed secrets that would ruin families if proven true, forced people who'd spent their lives unchallenged to confront consequences. Aristocrats forgave many things, but they never forgave humiliation. I don't know. Probably depends on how many people we implicated decide killing us is worth the risk, versus how many realize we're more dangerous dead than alive because of what we might have hidden. Comforting. I've never lied to you about the odds. This was always going to be dangerous. We knew that walking into the assembly. Then why did we do it? Seraphina's question hung in the cold air. Lucian thought about all the strategic answers, about exposing corruption, about justice, about ensuring no one else got buried alive the way she had been. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than any of that, because some cages are worth breaking even if the breaking kills you. Because survival that requires you to disappear isn't actually survival. Because we both spent years becoming exactly what we needed to be to avoid pain and realized too late that avoiding pain meant avoiding everything else too. Seraphina was quiet for a long moment. That's not strategic thinking. No. It's something more dangerous. It's caring about something other than survival. It's choosing meaning over safety. It's deciding that existing on our own terms matters more than existing comfortably in someone else's cage. And if it destroys us, then at least we'll have actually lived before we died. Instead of spending decades going through the motions while convincing ourselves that's enough. They stayed by the window until dawn turned the sky gray, watching the city wake up to a new reality. One where the aristocracy's corruption had been exposed publicly, where a forgotten daughter had stood before the king and refused to be erased, where the Duke of Ravenscar had burned his own empire rather than maintain power built on fear. 3 days later, the first investigations concluded. Lady Beatrice was formally charged with embezzlement, falsifying legal documents, and conspiracy to commit murder. Lord Ashford lost his position on the council. 4 other members resigned before they could be removed. The journalist published a detailed account of everything that had happened. Mrs. Chen and the magistrate testified about years of systematic corruption. The evidence Lucian and Seraphina had gathered became public record. And slowly, painfully, like resetting a bone that had healed wrong, the kingdom began to change. Not overnight, not completely. Aristocracy was too entrenched for that. But cracks appeared in the foundation. Questions got asked that had been forbidden before. People who'd been crushed by the system found their voices because 2 people had proven that speaking up didn't always end in destruction. Lucian and Seraphina lived quietly during the investigations, testified when called, answered questions with the same brutal honesty that had started everything, made no apologies for their methods because they'd learned that apologizing for survival just gave people permission to make you disappear again. The king offered to restore Lucian's titles, return his lands, rebuild Blackthorn Keep as a gesture of appreciation for exposing corruption. Lucian declined. He'd spent 10 years being the Duke of Ravenscar, building power, maintaining control, surviving by making sure no one could hurt him. And it had worked. He'd been untouchable, feared, safe, and absolutely empty. I don't want to be that person anymore, he told the king during their final private audience. I don't want power that requires isolation. I don't want safety that demands I stop feeling. I don't want to survive by making sure I never care about anything. Enough to be destroyed by losing it. Then what do you want? To figure out who I am without the fortress, without the fear, without spending every moment calculating threats and advantages. Just to exist as a person instead of a position. Edward studied him with eyes that had seen countless men choose power over everything else. You understand this is permanent. Once you give up your titles, getting them back will be nearly impossible. I understand. And you're willing to accept that? To go from being one of the most powerful men in the kingdom to being no one? Lucian thought about Seraphina, about her letters, about 3 years of being no one and surviving anyway, about the fact that invisibility had taught her things power never could. I'm willing to find out if being someone real matters more than being someone feared. The king signed the documents that afternoon. Lucian Ravenscar ceased to exist as a title, became just Lucian. A man with a past, an uncertain future, and no fortress to hide inside anymore. It was terrifying. It was liberating. It was the first honest thing he'd done in 10 years. Seraphina received her inheritance legally. Full control of the Whitmore estate. Everything her father had left her that Lady Beatrice had stolen. Enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life if she chose. She sold most of it, kept the house in the city that her father had loved, donated the rest to establishing schools for girls denied education, safe houses for women abandoned by aristocratic families, libraries in territories where knowledge was considered dangerous, all the things she'd dreamed about while locked in an attic writing letters to no one. They built something new together, not a fortress, not a prison, just a life that belonged to them instead of being inherited or imposed or maintained through fear. Lucian studied architecture, helped rebuild neighborhoods destroyed by aristocratic negligence, learned that using his strategic mind to create instead of destroy felt strange and satisfying in ways power never had. Seraphina wrote, published essays about the mechanisms of control used to keep people invisible, testified at trials about corruption and abuse disguised as protection, became the voice for everyone who'd been told they were too fragile to speak for themselves. They fought sometimes. Two people who'd spent years surviving alone learning to exist together created friction. Lucian's instinct toward control clashed with Seraphina's absolute refusal to be managed. Her tendency to push boundaries collided with his fear of caring too much. But they learned, slowly, painfully, with the same brutal honesty that had characterized everything else between them. One evening, 6 months after the winter assembly, they sat in the garden of the Whitmore house watching sunset turn the sky orange and gold. Lucien had dirt under his fingernails from planting vegetables. Seraphina had ink stains on her fingers from writing all day. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly. "The power, the certainty, being the Duke of Ravenscar who everyone feared." Lucien thought about the question, about Blackthorn Keep, about 10 years of survival through isolation, about the man he'd been who'd built walls so high nothing could reach him. Sometimes, when things are uncertain and I don't know if we'll survive what comes next, and I remember how simple it was when I just crushed anything that threatened me. But that simplicity came with a cost I didn't realize I was paying. Every person I destroyed, every threat I eliminated, every time I chose power over connection. It made me safer and emptier until I couldn't tell the difference between survival and slow death. Seraphina leaned against him. "I spent 3 years invisible, and part of me still wants to go back to that, to disappearing, to watching life through floorboards instead of participating in it. Because participation means risk, means being seen, means people can hurt you in ways invisibility prevents. What stops you? You? This? The fact that we proved something walking into that assembly, that being seen and surviving it is possible, that you don't have to choose between existing and being safe." They sat in the fading light while the city moved around them. No guards, no servants, no fortress walls. Just two people who'd survived burial in different ways, learning that resurrection meant more than just not being dead. It meant choosing to live despite every reason to stay hidden. A year after the Winter Assembly, the kingdom held its first open council session. Common citizens could attend, ask questions, demand accountability from nobles who'd spent generations answering to no one. Lucien and Seraphina sat in the back row watching, not participating, just witnessing the change they'd helped start. It wasn't perfect. Corruption still existed. Power still protected itself. But cracks had become fissures. Whispers had become demands. And slowly, painfully, the balance was shifting. Mrs. Chen testified about labor abuses. The journalist published investigations that would have gotten him killed a year ago. The magistrate oversaw trials where aristocrats actually faced consequences. And when it was over, when the session ended and nobles filed out looking shaken by questions they couldn't dismiss, Seraphina turned to Lucien. "Do you think it'll last? The changes, the accountability. Or will everything just slide back to how it was?" "Probably some of both. Systems built over centuries don't change overnight, but we prove change is possible. That people with nothing except truth and desperation can challenge power that thinks itself untouchable. Is that enough?" Lucien thought about his brother, about Adrian who died because powerful men thought rules didn't apply to them, about 10 years spent becoming exactly as ruthless as necessary to survive in a world that rewarded cruelty and punished vulnerability. About the fact that he'd almost become the thing he hated most before Seraphina's letters reminded him there was a difference between survival and living. It has to be. Because the alternative is accepting that nothing ever changes. That power always wins. That people like us should just stay buried because fighting back costs too much. And you don't believe that anymore. No. I believe that every person who refuses to disappear makes it harder for the next person to be erased. Every truth that gets exposed makes it harder to maintain comfortable lies. Every time someone chooses to stand up, knowing they'll probably be destroyed, it changes the calculation for everyone watching. Even if we don't win, especially then. Because losing while standing matters more than surviving on your knees. They walked home through streets that looked the same as they had a year ago, but felt different somehow. Like the air had changed. Like possibility existed where before there'd only been resignation. That night, Seraphina wrote while Lucian read beside the fire. The same routine they'd developed. Her documenting the world, him trying to understand it. Both of them learning that the survival skills that had kept them alive in isolation were different from the ones needed to actually build something together. "What are you writing?" he asked. "A letter. To everyone who's still locked away. Still invisible. Still being told they're too fragile or dangerous or inconvenient to exist." She paused, pen hovering over paper. "Telling them what we learned. That survival sometimes means choosing to be seen, even when being seen might destroy you. That power can be challenged. That invisibility is only safety until it becomes erasure. Will you send it? I don't know. Maybe just knowing it exists is enough. Proof that we were here, that we mattered, that we refused to disappear even when disappearing would have been easier." Lucienne crossed to where she sat. Read over her shoulder. The letter was brutal and beautiful. Every word chosen with the precision he recognized from her earlier writings. But this time there was no desperation. No plea for rescue, just observation and hard-won wisdom about what it costs to refuse erasure. Send it. People need to know they're not alone, that someone else survived what they're surviving, that the cage can be broken even if the breaking leaves scars. Seraphina looked up at him. "We're not heroes. We didn't save anyone except ourselves. We exposed corruption, but that doesn't undo the damage it caused. We burned down a system, but that doesn't mean what replaces it will be better. No. But we proved it could be challenged, that people with nothing except truth and determination can make power answer for itself. That's not saving everyone, but it's more than we had before we started." She kissed him, slow and deliberate. The kind of kiss that came from choosing each other every day instead of just once in a dramatic moment. From building trust through 1,000 small decisions to stay when leaving would be easier. When they broke apart, Seraphina returned to her letter. Lucian watched her write for a while before returning to his chair by the fire. The flames cast shadows that looked like they were dancing, or fighting, depending on how you looked at them. Outside, winter was ending, spring approaching with the promise of growth and change and all the uncertainty that came with new seasons. Inside, two people who'd spent years buried alive were learning to breathe again, to exist without fortresses or prisons. To survive not by avoiding pain, but by accepting that pain was proof you were actually living instead of just going through the motions. It wasn't the ending Lucienne had imagined 10 years ago when his brother died, and he decided the only way to survive was to become exactly as ruthless as the world that had destroyed Adrian. It wasn't the ending Seraphina had written in her letters when she documented her own disappearance and begged to be seen. But it was real, and messy, and uncertain, and somehow more honest than any carefully controlled performance could ever be. Years later, when people asked how they'd survived, Lucienne and Seraphina gave different answers depending on who was asking and what they thought would be useful. Sometimes they talked about strategy, about gathering evidence and building alliances and understanding that power could be challenged if you were willing to risk everything. Sometimes they talked about luck, about timing, about the fact that the king had been looking for an excuse to address corruption and they'd provided exactly the catalyst needed. But late at night, when it was just the two of them and the darkness and the question of how they'd actually made it through, the answer was simpler. They'd stopped trying to survive by becoming invulnerable. They'd learned that strength wasn't about building walls so high nothing could reach you. It was about being willing to stand exposed and risk destruction because some things mattered more than safety. It was about choosing to be seen even when being seen was terrifying. It was about understanding that the only thing more dangerous than caring was spending your life pretending you didn't. The Duke of Ravenscar had been feared across the kingdom, untouchable, powerful, safe, and completely alone. Lucien was just a man now. No title, no fortress, no carefully maintained distance between himself and everything that could hurt him. But he had Seraphina, had purpose, had the knowledge that he'd faced the thing he feared most, losing everything, and survived to discover that everything hadn't been worth as much as he'd thought. That existing mattered more than dominating. That being known mattered more than being feared. That love, messy and complicated and absolutely terrifying, was worth more than any empire built on isolation. And on the nights when the old fears returned, when Lucien woke up convinced he'd made a catastrophic mistake by giving up power, Seraphina would remind him of something he'd told her that first night in the library. That some cages were worth breaking even if the breaking killed you. That they'd both been buried alive in different ways and chose to claw through the dirt together. That survival without purpose was just slow death with better furniture. And Lucien would remember why he'd walked away from being the Duke of Ravenscar. Not because he was weak, because he was finally strong enough to admit that the fortress had been a prison all along. And he was done being afraid of what it felt like to actually live outside its walls.